Let's take a deeper dive into the vocabulary practice of concept circles. This article, Flooding Vocabulary Gaps to Accelerate Word Learning, explains that students with limited vocabulary knowledge aren't gaining the right kind of skills to catch up. In order to include more structured vocabulary practice, programs created lists to introduce a limited number of words to accompany a text or unit. Learning a few words each week does not capitalize on a brain's language acquisition abilities, and it does not accomplish the goal of expanding the vocabulary of students. This brings us to the idea of opening the floodgates, creating word learning environments where words are noticed, analyzed, and alive throughout the lesson. Brains are amazingly capable of soaking up new words and concepts, so volume is important. We are ready to move beyond the traditional vocabulary list, and our instruction is ready to move forward too. We know that exposure to a new word, and even looking up the definition, does not cement the word into student vocabulary. Neurological pathways need to be open to hold on to new words. The brain holds tight to new learning through connections. These connections catch the new vocabulary, nestle it inside established schema, and build it into more permanent knowledge. Today, I will walk you through the planning and use of concept circles. This instructional strategy accomplishes many of the goals other vocabulary techniques leave behind. All of our activities today can be adapted for online learning. So, let's get started. Our system for ELA lesson planning is called the Intellectual Preparation Process, or IPP for short. I will use this familiar framework to show you how to plan effective vocabulary instruction with concept circles. The first step of IPP is deconstructing and reconstructing the standards. For this work, I use the focus standards for the term and the year at a glance. Of course, the logical place to start is the often neglected vocabulary standards. I look closely at the language to help me pull these standards apart. It's important to remember that the standards are as much of an ending place as they are a starting place. I must consider what prerequisite teaching my students need to master the standards. For instance, in figurative language alone, there are many hidden skills. So, when I read Mary Anning, I will look for what the text offers in terms of figurative language. I will keep an eye out for domain-specific words since I know it is a biographical text. It is clear I will need to work on some lessons about prefixes, suffixes, and orthography. Also, I see genre-specific requirements for mythology. While this isn't a myth itself, I know later in the year we will study a series of myths. That unit will require deep character analysis. So, I can use Mary Anning to lay the foundation for the work ahead. The vocabulary standards are not the only ones addressed through vocabulary study. When we analyze vocabulary, it can lead to discussions about word choice, which brings to light decisions made by the author, which illuminates an author's purpose or clues to larger themes. And it all started with vocabulary. Now that we know what to look for from the standards, it is time to reread the text. When I engage with the annotations protocol, I will ask myself these questions. What will my students struggle with based on what I know from assessment data? What do I know about the trends of needs in my class? What strengths will my class bring to these words? What larger themes or concepts do I hope they glean from this text? What groups do I see forming? What's coming up next in my curriculum that could be a link? Basically, I'm looking at the word choice in the text as gateways into lessons that my class would benefit from. When I read Mary Anning, The Girl Who Cracked Open the World, I saw that there is content knowledge to learn about Mary Anning, women's role in science, and the beginnings of paleontology. When planning for concept circles, I must choose the concept or category to guide students toward vocabulary words that achieve the goals of the standard. After reading the text with a vocab-specific lens, I decide on 2 different circles. For both concept circles, I think carefully about how to articulate my categories. We just read Porpoises in Peril, where there were words around science and the study of animals. Coming up, we will read a nonfiction book about bones, so fossils could be an interesting connection. There are a few dinosaur-specific words that come in the back half of the book, but frankly, learning dinosaur words alone won't be the most beneficial thing for my students. I realize that I want my students to see Mary's contribution as a woman in science. If I chose the concept science, it won't encourage my students to capture words like chisel, which I noticed early in the book. For this reason, I'm going to try science, terms, and tools. This will allow for most of the larger and newer science words to be captured in the circle and promote sorting, grouping, and additions later on. For my second concept circle, I notice the author uses great descriptive language. I also know that using this text as a mentor text for descriptive writing will lead to great connections to our class writing assignments for this text and beyond. At first, I thought of the category adjectives, but that doesn't capture all the descriptive language and leaves out great words like lurked. Okay, so then I'll just use descriptive language. But when I teach that, descriptive language has all kinds of subcategories. Kids may find too many examples in the text and will get lost in adding tons of words to our circle. I decide on one specific part of descriptive language, words that elicit imagery. Words that help me see in my mind exactly what the author wants me to see. That way, I can get words like exposed, crumbling, and lurked, great language that kids can use in writing more frequently. I also see that many of these words are multi-syllable words with suffixes. This will lend itself to possible word study mini-lessons for my students who struggle to solve words like this on AimsWeb. Remember, you don't actually have to construct the concept circles at this point in planning. I simply must know that the categories I've planned for have good entry points for students. We can always edit these categories together as a class. I will be sharing many ways to engage with concept circles. Choosing how your students will engage happens during IPP. Consider this a menu of all the ways concept circles can be alive in your instruction. I just needed some good ideas to get going. So let's skip ahead to using concept circles with students. Through a combination of independent work, partner work, small group work, and whole group, we have gathered a great list of words for each of our concept circles. Gathering words is the most basic activity for concept circles. Students can own that part without much training, especially if they can debate about adding a word with a small group of peers. All the activity options that follow will require explicit modeling so students understand how to complete the task successfully. You won't have time to do all of this work in every text, but they are great to keep in your back pocket as possibilities for any unit. I will walk through our menu of activities using Mary Anning as an example. The general category can push students to capture some words you intended and other words you didn't. You can either probe the students with, what subgroups can we make out of these words? Or you could guide them to find words to fit into a subgroup of your choice. Word study in the upper grades is difficult to plan. Use your assessment data to see what kind of spelling patterns your students need more explicit instruction with. For instance, I see the word gaping, which many students read as gapping with a short A sound. Misspelling words with an E at the end of the root word before adding a suffix is a common error in student writing as well. I plan a 10-minute lesson to teach this rule using words from the imagery circle that are examples and non-examples. After taking the time to teach a word study mini lesson, it may be worth it to create a physical or virtual anchor chart together or in groups, so students can remember the rule. They can also have a place to put these in their response notebooks. Morphology is the study of forms of words. Orthography is the conventional system of spelling. We sometimes rely too heavily on instruction in the lower grades for phonics and word solving, But we have seen time and time again older students who have not mastered the English code. After a word study mini-lesson using words from our circles, I can send students off in content-related paired text or articles to read and search for other words that match the spelling patterns or word forms that we studied. For instance, I see we can use our scientific circle to study forms of the word curious. I can ask students to find a word in another text that mimics our example. At the end of a text or unit, a concept map is an excellent alternative to a traditional vocabulary assessment. Ask students to choose a circle, then illustrate how the words relate to one another. A concept map is best used with nonfiction content. In preparation for a concept map, consider doing the group activity hexagonal thinking. This activity is much easier to prep online as opposed to in the classroom, thanks to copy and paste. You can create a slide or virtual workspace with the words on hexagons. The students work together to arrange the words according to the relationships in their meanings. This will illuminate content pathways that they can use when they illustrate their concept map. Vocabulary study helps students become more competent readers, but it can be also used to widen their vocabulary for writing. TDAs are a top priority of upper grade teachers. While constructing the TDA requires students to pull words from the concept circles. The whole point is that students adopt these high-quality words and start using them correctly in new contexts. Semantic gradients are created by students or groups of students to show the shades of meaning between two extremes. Sometimes, your circles will provide words on both ends of the spectrum. Other times, you may only see one extreme or the other. I may provide students with two antonyms like exposed and encased. Then, I will see if they can fill in the words that would make sense along the gradient. Push students not to use phrases, but instead work together to come up with one word for what they're trying to explain. This is a great example of student discourse. In order to plan successful vocabulary instruction, here are the big takeaways to remember. First, build word consciousness in your students. Introduce and talk about many words from readings every day. Next, use word walls with semantic clusters of words and sets, concept circles, and charts to keep words visible and in circulation. You will also want to involve students in collecting, sorting, and identifying semantic relationships among words. Finally, you want to be sure to model and encourage students to share enthusiasm and fascination for learning more about words and language during and after school and everywhere they go. Good luck!